Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the PowerPoint Polar New Users Training. My name is Derek Abram. I'm the trainer here at Turning Technologies Canada. I'll be taking you through today's training session. As we go through the session today, you'll probably notice upon entering the webinar room that everybody was muted. You can imagine with webinars, we can pretty quickly get out of control with background noise. So if you do have any questions as we go along, please feel free to submit them using either the chat function or the Q&A function found in the GoToWebinar control panel on the side of your screen. Might be on the top of your screen depending on your system setup. And I'll try to get to those as we go. If there's any that I can't answer as we go, there will probably be a few minutes left at the end for some Q&A as well. So just kind of fire those in. We'll get to them as we can. Anything that I can't answer during the webinar today, I will include responses in email format to you as well. A couple quick notes about myself. As I mentioned, I am the trainer here at Turning Technologies Canada. I've been with the company for about 5.5 years. Started out on the sales side for a couple of years and then transitioned over to the training area. So in terms of using me as a resource going forward, as far as questions on how can we do this, can Turning Point do this in my session, absolutely feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email, fire me a call, or leave me a voicemail, and I'm always more than happy to go through those things and kind of work with you during your presentation. Now, there's going to be a lot of content in the session today. We're going to try to break it down into smaller pieces. Obviously, feel free to write notes as we go if you've got a piece of paper there. I will also be sending out a recording of this webinar probably tomorrow morning after it's done all its processing and everything. I'm also going to be sending out a PDF resource document as well that pretty much covers everything we're going to be having a look at here today. So don't feel like if you're completely new to the technology, you've got to write down absolutely everything I say, because I will make sure that you have that documentation that you'll need to kind of start using some of these things that we're going to have a look at. So as I mentioned, we're going to be sticking to the basics today. We're going to start with the hardware setup and just talk a little bit about how that works. We're going to talk about pre-presentation procedures, so what you need to do before you launch a presentation. We're going to look at building a few different types of question slides. We're going to look at how to actually run your presentation, and then we're going to look at a little bit at the reporting in the back end as well. Okay, so let's get started here. We'll talk about the hardware setup first. Now, as far as the hardware setup goes, it's pretty straightforward. You guys will probably have similar technology to what I have on the screen here right now. Depending on how long you've had your equipment for, it may look a little bit different. These are the newer, updated designed keypads and receivers. Your receiver might be a dark gray color. Your faceplate on your keypads might look a little bit different. Regardless of what you've got, though, the setup is basically the same. Essentially, what you're going to be doing is plugging your USB receiver into any available USB port on the computer. And we recommend that being step number one. The reason for that is just to give the computer those couple seconds to sort of recognize that the receiver's there, so Turning Point can see it when you launch it. And then the other component is the keypad. And that's kind of the part where people sometimes struggle with, how do I hand these out? What's the best way to do it? And really it boils down to what kind of works best for you. So whether that is having the keypads out at tables ahead of time, everybody kind of sits down and picks up a keypad and starts answering questions, whether that's handing them out at a registration table, whatever really works best for that particular event you're doing is really all you've got to worry about. In terms of the keypads, there's no power buttons on them. You don't have to activate them or link them up or anything like that. It's literally just put them into the participant's hands, and when the question starts coming up on screen, they literally just push 1, 2, 3 or A, B, or C, depending on what their response is to that particular question, and that's it. As far as the hardware itself goes, it's all based off of a radio frequency technology. So all that means is the signal will travel through walls, tables, chairs, and things like that. So you do not need to worry about line of sight. With all the conferences and events and things we do, a lot of times we see people trying to figure out how they're going to get that receiver at the front of the room so everybody can see it. And it doesn't matter where that receiver is, as long as it's within 200 feet of all your participants, it will pick up their responses, no problem at all. So it's extremely flexible. In terms of battery life and things like that, the two standard keypad models, the LCD and the standard response card RF here, they just run off two CR2032 coin cell style batteries, so it's just a very common battery that you can get just about anywhere. They're generally about a couple bucks a piece. So that's really what you're looking for as far as maintenance goes on those two standard models. The NXT here on the top right and the QT on the lower right, those guys both run off two AAAs. As far as battery life goes, it really depends on how frequently the keypads are being used. If it's one of those things where they're being used a couple times a month, you can probably expect anywhere from 12 up to 18 months of battery life. If they're being used, a couple times a week, you're probably going to get closer to that 12-month time frame. So what I generally recommend for those of you that I maybe haven't spoken to in training sessions in the past that are on the call today, I generally recommend plan a battery replacement once a year for your keypads. It's kind of like doing an oil change on your car every 5,000 kilometers or 10,000 kilometers. Just make sure that you're always ready to go. If you happen to have the LCD model, the NXT or the QT, each of those do have battery indicators on their displays, so it's very easy to tell at what point your batteries will need to be replaced. When the battery life gets to the point where it's one of those things, hey, you should replace these in the next day or two, the battery indicator will start to flash, so it'll give you that feedback. The response card RF, the standard one here down in the lower left, it's a little trickier because there's no screen on it. You kind of have to rely on judgment. How long has it been since the batteries have been replaced, that sort of thing. You will find that as the battery life gets lower, the range of the keypad will also decrease to kind of go along with that. So if you find you've got a few keypads where they only seem to be able to communicate when you're right up front near the receiver, it's a pretty good signal that the batteries are getting weak in that unit. Toss a couple of new batteries in and you're good to go. So that's your overall general hardware. Nice and easy. We don't want to overcomplicate things here, so we try to keep it as simple as possible in terms of setting up your hardware. So now, as with anything, there's always a few things that you need to do before your presentation. Obviously, before we even start looking at any of these things in terms of running a presentation, you obviously need to go through the steps of building that presentation, which we're going to look at in a little bit. But these are kind of the steps that you would go through at the beginning of a presentation. And this sheet is actually in the PDF that I'm going to email out. So if you're grabbing screenshots or taking pictures with your smartphones, don't worry, you'll get this in a PDF format as well. So in terms of getting ready to run a presentation, there's 10 steps here, but the pre-presentation really only goes up to step number 8. So it's kind of the 8 steps to getting ready to run your presentation. So obviously, like I mentioned, step number 1, plug your receiver in to give the computer the couple seconds to sort of recognize that it's there. Step number 2 is going to be to open Turning Point, which is going to give you the dashboard that I've got the screenshot of right here. For any of you that have used Turning Point before, you'll recognize that. Okay, step number 3, and this is one that I always recommend, generally when you're getting ready to run a presentation live, if you're just building stuff and just testing stuff, it's not a huge deal. But I always recommend verifying your receiver connection if you're using a receiver, and verifying your ResponseWare connection if you're going to be using ResponseWare for web polling. It's very easy to tell. On the dashboard screenshot here, it may be hard to see over the webinar. There's a little area here that says receiver, and in this screenshot it shows the number 41, and you'll notice the little radio tower is lit up. So that is telling you that your receiver's plugged in, the computer knows it's there, and that it's on channel 41, which is the default channel setting for your receiver. The ResponseWare area here, you'll see that in this screenshot it was not connected. So it's going to show click to connect. So if you're getting ready to use a web polling session and that section there says click to connect, you know you're not connected and you know your participants aren't going to be able to connect to that presentation and participate. When ResponseWare is connected, that is going to show your 6-digit session ID. So it's going to show a number there. And the little picture of the smartphone is going to show a little green wireless symbol on it. So that's kind of your flag to say ResponseWare is connected. Now you can use both those technologies together. So if you had a group of people sitting there physically with you, you can have your receiver plugged in, those people communicating with your presentation through that receiver. If you had other people who are outside of that location, maybe on the other side of the country or other side of the world even, you can have ResponseWare connected as well, and those participants can connect to that session ID. Okay, so you can use those two things together at the same time. Step number 4 is going to be to select a participant list. Now this is strictly optional. Participant lists only need to be selected and loaded if you want to track your individual participants. Now today we're not going to go over building a participant list. That's in a different training session that covers the advanced topics. However, if we had built one, you're going to select it here in the little participants box in the top left corner, and that simply tells Turning Point, here's the list of people who I'm expecting in my presentation and which keypads they're going to be holding. And then your final step from the dashboard here is just simply going to be to click that big panel that says PowerPoint polling. When you click your PowerPoint polling panel, Turning Point is just going to go find your PowerPoint application, fire it up, and make sure that the Turning Point plugin is loaded into that PowerPoint application for you so that it makes sure you're ready to go. Once you've got PowerPoint open, your next step is to open your presentation that you want to run. Step number 7 is a very important one, reset your session. Basically what that's going to do is make sure that there's no pre-existing data in your presentation when you go to run it. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit more detail later on when we start building a couple questions. I'm going to show you why you want to do that, and if you don't, I'm going to show you what the potential implications are of that. And then step number 8 is just to simply run your presentation just like you normally would. Okay, the only difference being we're going to have polling slides in it. And then step number 9 and 10, those are kind of your pre or post-session steps where you're going to save the data that you've collected and you're going to have a look at your reports. Okay. So let's have a look at building some different types of interactive questions. The 3 main things I want to have a look at this afternoon are creating your standard multiple choice question, adding a correct answer and correct answer indicator to a multiple choice question, and then we're going to have a look at the demographic assignment feature as well. So those are the sort of the 3 areas we're going to look at in terms of building just a basic interactive polling slide. Let me just see if there's any questions here. Okay, good so far. Okay, so I just hit escape there to get back out of my show mode into edit mode here. And you'll notice while I'm in edit mode in PowerPoint, I've got all my regular PowerPoint toolbars. So it's all still PowerPoint just like we know it today. The thing you'll notice that we've added is the Turning Point toolbar. Okay, now that is always sort of your visual checkpoint when you start getting ready to run a presentation. If you're sitting here opening up your presentation file and you do not see the Turning Point toolbar loaded in there, that tells you that Turning Point is not running, and any polling slides you've created are only going to show up as regular PowerPoint slides. Okay, if that ever happens to you, it's a very easy thing to fix. Chances are you just forgot to open the Turning Point dashboard first. So in that scenario, all you're going to do is close down your PowerPoint application completely, go back to your desktop and double-click your Turning Point icon, which is going to give you your dashboard that we looked at right here. Okay, you're going to go through those steps. So you're going to check to make sure your receiver's plugged in, select a participant list if it's applicable, and you're going to hit your PowerPoint polling option from there and then open your presentation. So It's a very easy thing to miss, launching Turning Point first. It's a fairly common thing that happens, and it's also one of the easier things to correct if it happens to you as well. So let's start having a look at how to just build a basic interactive polling slide. Now, the process of building a polling slide and the steps we're going to go through here in a second, they're exactly the same whether you are adding polling slides to an existing presentation like I am right now, or you're building a new presentation from scratch. It's the same steps. You don't have to do anything differently. The only thing that you're going to do a little differently if you're adding them to an existing presentation is you've got that one additional step of having to open that presentation you want to add the questions to first, right? That's the only thing you're going to do differently. And so as far as building questions and using any of the interactive functionality within Turning Point, all that is done through the Turning Point toolbar here. So the easiest way to kind of remember everything is anything on the Turning Point toolbar is related to your polling. Anything outside of that Turning Point toolbar is just regular PowerPoint functionality. So that goes for creating new PowerPoint slides that are just regular slides, adding animations, PowerPoint presentation templates, all that sort of stuff is just regular PowerPoint functionality like you've known it all along. So I'm going to build a multiple choice question. So I'm going to start with the new menu here. And it contains all the different types of questions you can ask. Now, depending on the type of keypad devices you have, you may or may not be able to use all the features in this new slide dropdown. The short answer, numeric response, and essay slides, those three options are geared specifically towards the NXT, the QT keypad, and our web polling technology, because for those three options you need to be able to key in words and sentences and things like that. So those are the only three that are really off limits if you've got our standard RF or LCD models. Okay, so keep that in mind. And you'll see on my screen here, they're all labeled in a way that is pretty easy to follow along with, right? You come in here and we want to create a multiple choice question. There it is right at the top of the list. So we're just going to choose multiple choice. And what Turning Point does is it builds a template for you. And all you really need to do from this point is fill in the blanks. And you'll notice here when it built the template for me, it automatically picked up all the settings from my PowerPoint template. So if you're using anything with specialized fonts, background images, branded footers, any of that sort of thing, Turning Point will work with that just fine. And so it's just a matter of filling in the blanks. So we type the question where it asks for the question. Okay, and then we enter our answers where it asks for the answers. Okay, now in terms of answer choices with a multiple choice question, you can have as few as 2 and as many as 10 different answer choices. And you'll notice here that I'm just simply typing inside of a text box. Now what's going to happen is as soon as I click outside of that text box, Turning Point's going to update the chart object. And the idea here is that it gives you a rough idea as to what the chart's going to look like when you actually run it with your participants, right? Without that, you have no real clue as to what it's going to show. And one of the things that throws a lot of people off is that when it shows the thumbnail, it'll do, 17% across the chart. If you've got 3 options, it does 33% on each one. And it's just Turning Point's way of kind of putting some placeholder data there to generate that preview for you. As far as building a basic polling slide where there's no correct answer, we're just looking to collect data, whether it's opinions or feedback, that is all we have to do. This is ready to go, and we can poll it and now collect data from the audience. Okay, so nice and easy. In terms of the polling slide, they're always sort of changeable, right? So if we decide, we want to remove Calgary as an option, you can just simply delete the option for Calgary. If you then say, you know what, maybe we want to add Calgary back. Let's make it option number 6, right? We can add Calgary back. So once you've created a slide, you can always go back and modify it and make changes to it, whether it's a polling slide or not. So they're extremely flexible that way. Now, a couple points in terms of a polling slide. In order for a polling slide to function 100% correctly without any issues, it requires a question, it requires the answers, and it requires the chart. Now, the chart is the big one. It's the thing that gets removed a lot. And typically the scenario that we see where the chart gets removed will be client creates a survey and they don't want the results to be displayed to the audience, right? You're just collecting that information as feedback for yourselves. And so in those scenarios, instead of deleting the chart, because it can cause problems with polling, our recommendation is to grab the chart object and just move it off the slide, off to the area that the audience isn't going to be able to see. So in terms of Turning Point, it's still happy that it has somewhere to store your data temporarily. In terms of the audience, they're not going to see the results. Okay, so keep that in mind. Don't delete the chart. If you do happen to delete the chart, not a hard thing to fix. So if you realize, oh man, didn't mean to do that, you can either simply undo it, or you can go to the Objects menu on your Turning Point toolbar and go to the Charts pop-out menu, and you could just reinsert that chart again, and it'll fix the problem. You can also use that process to change your chart format. So if you prefer, instead of a vertical chart, if you wanted to add a donut chart, for example, you can just select the donut chart. Turning Point updates the chart object for you. So you can use that menu option to fix an accidentally deleted chart. You can also use it to change the chart format if you have a different preference. Okay, now in terms of polling this, all we're going to do is I'll run this. Actually, let me do the correct answers and then we'll run through it. So in terms of a question without any sort of correct answer associated to it, that's the process we're going to go through. We're just going to go to New. We're going to go to Multiple Choice. We're going to fill in our questions, fill in our answers, and we're done. In terms of a question that has a correct answer and you want to show that visually to the audience, it's going to add 2 additional steps. The first step is going to be to set what the correct answer is. The second step is going to be to add the correct answer indicator. And so we're going to do that right now. I'm just going to open up my slide preferences panel here. It was just floating up here in the top corner of my screen. And the preferences panel gives you access to settings that you can change that are only going to impact this question we're looking at. It's not going to change anything else in the rest of your presentation. And so the area that we're interested in terms of setting correct answers is the scoring options area at the bottom. And you'll notice here on my screen, there's a drop down here for each answer option I've created. All I have to do is tell Turning Point that in this case option number 3 is correct. It assumes that my other options are incorrect, and it flags them and color codes them accordingly for me. So that's the first extra step that we've got to do. Our next extra step is adding that correct answer indicator. The answer indicators are found in the Objects menu on the Turning Point toolbar, and it's the very first pop-out menu, so it's nice and easy to get to. And Turning Point has a bunch of pre-built options that you can just go in there and grab really quick. There's also a custom option. The great thing with the custom option is it allows you to use images that go along with the topic of your presentation. So instead of just using a generic check mark or a blinking box or a smiley face, you can use logos, or if you're doing like a product knowledge type presentation, you can use different products and things like that, so you can have a bit of fun. And that is going to support any image format that PowerPoint works with. So you've got tons of flexibility there. I'm just going to grab the check mark. And you'll notice when I'm in edit mode, that check mark appears beside the correct answer right away. Don't let that throw you off. When you actually run the presentation, Turning Point will take care of all the animation sequences behind the scenes for you via the PowerPoint animation system. So it's going to make sure that that check mark does not appear until you want it to show up. Okay, so don't worry about that. Turning Point will handle it for you on its own. And so that's all there is to it if you have a question that has a single correct answer. Now we can go a couple steps further with this. So what if we had a question where there was more than one correct answer that the audience needed to select in order to be correct, right? So instead of selecting 3, let's say they had to select 3 and 6 because maybe we have an office in Calgary as well. What we need to do is we're going to tell Turning Point that 3 and 6 are correct answer choices. What we've done by just doing what I just did now, just selecting number 6, we've told Turning Point that the participant can select 3 or 6 to be correct. There's nothing that says you have to pick 3 and 6. To do that 3 and 6 functionality, there's another setting we need to change here. And that is in the question options area up at the top. Now, because we want a participant to choose 2 answer choices, we need to change this setting in Turning Point. So we need to turn on multiple responses for this question by checking off the box. We need to set the response limit. So by default, this is 2. So you want this to match however many answers are required to be correct. So if I had 3 correct answers that had to be selected, I'm going to set that to 3. Now this is the trick right here, all or nothing scoring. That's the checkbox that you want to make sure you enable. Once you've checked that off, based on this combination we've now set up, in order to get this question correct, a participant has to select 3 and 6. Okay, it doesn't matter the order they pick them in, as long as they pick those 2 options, they're going to get this question correct. Okay, so it's a different way of having a question with a correct answer. Instead of just having a single choice the audience is going to pick, you can really kind of push them to think a little bit more about it and come up with a couple of answer options that are required to get the question correct. Now, once we've done all that, you'll notice here that I've set 3 and 6 as my correct answer choice. However, I only have a correct answer indicator beside number 3. Easy thing to fix. I'm just going to go to my Objects menu, Correct Answer Indicator. I'm going to choose my check mark again, and it's just going to add that additional check mark in there for me, so it's nice and easy. Okay. So that is how you're going to set correct answers, set a question with multiple correct answers required, and that's all there is to it. Okay. Now let's look at how this is actually going to poll during your presentation. And here's a little trick I'm going to show you that not a lot of people seem to know about. Up here on the Turning Point toolbar, there's this little drop-down in the polling options area. And by default, when you open up Turning Point, it defaults to live polling. So Turning Point says, okay, well, I'm just going to assume that you've got a live audience in front of you. Now, that's not always going to be the case, right? Quite often, you're going to want to test your presentation while you're at the office before you go live, and obviously that's something we recommend doing. And you may not always have access to that hardware to do that, right? Somebody else might have it. So what you can do here, from this drop-down, you can select the option for simulated polling. It's a nice, quick, easy way to test your presentation, because what's going to happen is Turning Point is going to fire 30 completely random responses into each question for you. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Okay, and here's my polling slide that we just built. And so what's going to happen is there's the toolbar that's going to show up on your polling slide. Okay, this is only going to show up on your polling slides. You're not going to see it on a regular PowerPoint slide. And the idea with this toolbar here is that it tells you, as the facilitator or presenter, what Turning Point is doing at any point. And so what's going to happen is when your question comes up on screen, polling starts automatically. You do not need to do anything. So your receiver goes out and starts looking for responses from your audience automatically. Now in my case, because I have it on simulated polling, I'm just going to get 30 responses here in my responses box. The idea with the responses box is that it lets you see how many people in your audience have responded to the question so far. So whether you've got, say, 10 people, whether you've got, 8,000 or 9,000 people, you can get that pretty quick snapshot. Now, by default, it is entirely up to you as the presenter when you want to close polling. And a couple minutes ago, I mentioned that Turning Point just uses the PowerPoint animation system to trigger everything. So to close polling, it's just like working with a regular PowerPoint slide that has animations on it. So when we want the polling slide to do the next thing, just simply advance your slide. So whether that is your arrow key, your space bar, a mouse click, or a presenter cue, it makes no difference. So I'm just going to go ahead, advance my slide one time, polling closes, and the chart shows up. Now, a common question you'll tend to get from your participants during generally the very first question that you poll, somebody will usually ask if they can change their mind. And by default, Turning Point does allow your participants to change their answer choice as many times as they want, as long as polling is open. Okay? As soon as you close polling, everybody's results are locked in, and it is finalized. Okay? Now, the nice thing is you'll notice that the correct answer indicators have not appeared yet, right? So based on the results that come in from the participants, it really gives you the ability to kind of step back and think to yourself, okay, do we need to talk about this more? Are the results okay? Does everybody get it? Are we all on the same page? Or is your audience completely out in left field, right? Do you need to talk about it more? So you have that opportunity to talk about it before you show them what the answer should be. Now, to show the correct answer indicator, it's one additional step. We're just going to advance our slide again. Okay? By advancing our slide again, we trigger the next set of animations, which is our correct answer indicator, and we're able to give the audience that visual feedback to say, here's the correct answers. Okay? And now we can steer the discussion to, well, why are those the correct answers, right? Okay, and that's all there is to it in terms of polling a basic interactive polling slide. It's just a matter of advancing your slide just like you would with a regular PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so that's your multiple choice question slide with correct answers assigned to it. The next question type we'll have a look at here is your demographic assignment slide. Now, the demographic assignment slide is a very easy slide to add to your presentation, and it can give you a lot of additional interesting information based on how different groups of people answer all of your questions. So in order to add a demographic assignment slide, we're going to go to the new slide menu just like we did before, except this time we're going to choose the option for demographic assignment. And when Turning Point builds your demographic assignment slide template, it looks just like a regular multiple choice polling slide. And in fact, you build it just like a regular multiple choice polling slide as well. So let's say we wanted to break our audience down by department. We're going to simply ask them, what department are you from? And we'll build some answer choices here. And we'll do training, and then other. Okay. That's all you have to do. We just have to build one or two of these questions into our presentation, and Turning Point will take care of the rest for you. Now, the way this works, just so that you all know, is that it's based on the keypad the participant has in their hand when they answer this particular question. So the trick is you want to make sure that your participants use the same keypad throughout the entire session when you're doing any sort of demographic tracking, right? You can imagine if you did, like a morning, right, and then everybody goes for lunch, comes back and picks up totally different keypads than they had for the morning, and you carry on, right? That's going to throw your demographic data completely out of whack for the second part of the day. So that's the only thing you need to watch when you're doing any sort of demographic tracking. Okay. Couple other neat things with your demographic assignment feature. Number one, it does not have to be the very first thing that you pull. So instead of having it right at the starting, right up front, and kind of pigeonholing people into groups or making them feel like, oh, okay, you know, I thought this was anonymous, you can actually place your demographic assignment slide anywhere in your presentation, and you will always get complete demographic tracking for everything that came before it as well as after. Okay, so you could do your demographic question at the very end of your presentation if you wanted to, and it'll work just fine. The other thing with your demographic assignment feature is that you can also have as many of them as you want. So if we wanted to do, you know, what department are you from, but then let's say we also wanted to add an additional layer where we ask the audience, you know, how many years have you been with the organization, right? So we want to collect the area that they work in and how long they've been there. We can add an additional demographic assignment slide. So I'm just going to do that right now. So how long have you worked here? Okay, and let's say those were our options. Okay. By doing this, what you give yourself the ability to do is look at your results based on how did people from sales answer versus how did people from accounting answer, right? Were there commonalities? Were they totally different in their opinions? You know, what did they have to say in comparison to each other? You can also look at, well, how did the employees that have been here for 1 to 4 years answer questions versus maybe employees that have been here for 10 to 14, right? Do the people that have been here for a shorter time, you know, maybe they have knowledge that the other group doesn't have, or vice versa, right? Is there an opportunity to maybe pair people from these two groups together to help them learn together, right? So you can do it that way as well. Now, the other thing you can do is you can use these as filters in your demographic report. So let's say, for example, we wanted to see how people from the training department answered questions, but we also only want to see people from the training department that have maybe been there for 5 to 9 years, right? You can check off those two options in the report, and Turning Point will filter out only people from the training department and only people that have been there for 5 to 9 years. And it's going to show you how that very, very specific group of people answered all of your questions in that presentation. So it's a very easy feature to implement. It can give you a lot of really interesting information, especially if you are working with your own clients and you're going in and doing consulting and things like that. It can really let you now provide those clients some further information based on, you know, here's how this group of employees answered all the questions that we posed to them, right? So it gives you some additional value in terms of the reports and things you can give back. Okay, so that's all there is to it as far as the demographic assignment question goes. Again, by adding a couple of these, we're really probably only adding, you know, maybe 30 seconds at most to our presentation, right? So it's not like we're adding 5 or 10 minutes or anything like that. And the trade-off is huge because you get those additional reports. Okay, so let's talk about facilitating a presentation. So we've gone through the polling process. We've talked about how to actually poll a question, but there's a couple things that can come up at any point during a presentation, right? The two most common things that I hear about are repolling a question and creating a question on the fly, right? Somebody in the audience asks a question, or there's a discussion and something pops into my head and I think, you know, hey, I want to ask that to the audience, right? Those are things that are built into Turning Point that you can access and use without having to leave your presentation, okay? So the first one here is question on the fly. So I'm just going to, repolling. So I'm just going to build another question here really quick. We'll just do a quick true-false. Today is St. Patrick's Day. 1 true, 2 false. And I'm just going to poll this with simulated polling. All right. So let's say audience responds to the question. and we close polling, and the results are not at all what we expected, right? Audiences out there in left field, they obviously don't quite have a handle on what we've been talking about, right? If our presentation was about St. Patrick's Day. So now we want to have a discussion, and maybe we want to poll the question again, right? To see, okay, well, based on the last couple minutes of discussion, are you any closer to understanding the concept? What you can do is on the Turning Point toolbar here, there's a little green icon here down towards the left end. It kind of looks like a partial circle with an arrow in it. That is your repoll question button. So any time you want to repoll a question, whether it's because you had a discussion and now you want to see if they get it, or maybe you close polling early by accident, right? All you have to do is click that button. Turning Point will clear out any data that was collected, reopen polling, and collect a new set of data, okay? So when I close polling, we're going to have a different result. Now, the really cool thing is, behind the scenes, Turning Point does not throw away the data, the original data, I should say, when you repoll a question. So when we go to run our report later on, we're going to see this question in there twice. We're going to see the first time we polled it, followed by the second time we polled it. And then if we polled it a third time, we're going to see the results for the third poll as well. So it really gives you that whole story of what happened during your presentation, right? So in the case of, wow, first time around, they were really out there. You can say, okay, well, we polled it 3 times, and by the time we got around to the third time, they got a handle on it, right? So it keeps all that historical data for you. Now, the other option, and I'm going to do it right from this slide, is question on the fly. Let's say there's a discussion in the audience, and you think to yourself, oh, hey, I just heard somebody say something. I'm going to throw that out there to the audience. Or a participant stands up and says, oh, well, my opinion on that topic is, A, B, and C. You can very easily say to the audience, okay, well, let's see who else agrees with you, right? And so there's a couple ways we can do this. On the Turning Point toolbar here, there's a little button, kind of, it's 1, 2 over from the repoll button. It looks like a little slide with a plus sign on it. When you click on that, it gives you some options. You can do a very quick multiple choice. So if we just wanted to very, very quickly say to the audience, okay, do you guys agree with this particular audience member and what he just said? I'm going to choose a multiple choice, and let's just say we want to go with 3 answer choices. Turning Point is going to just throw a very generic slide in. So you can say, all right, if you agree with this person, push 1. If you disagree with this person, push 2. And if you have absolutely no opinion on the topic, push 3. Right? So it gives you that ability to just verbally give the audience the answer choices and kind of the direction on what to press. Close polling. There's the results. So now you have the ability to say, well, 40% of the audience agrees with you, right? So it's very easy to kind of do that stuff on the fly. The other option you have on that menu is custom. Now, the custom option lets you actually create your very own question and your very own set of answer choices. So we just type our question in. Okay, you don't need to number your answer choices. You just put each one on its own separate line, and you hit Insert. And Turning Point is just going to plug that question directly into your presentation for your audience to answer. Okay, so it's very, very easy. You can be as generic or as detailed with it as you want, okay, and it's going to work perfectly fine. Now, the cool thing that Turning Point does is it will add those as slides to your presentation. So if you create a custom question on the fly and you think to yourself after that presentation's done, hey, I really want to keep that. That was a great question. I'm going to use it again next time. All you have to do is just save your presentation, and that now becomes a polling slide in that presentation deck. Okay, so very, very easy to keep it. Now, common question I get as far as the question on the fly functionality, a lot of times people will say, well, do those questions appear in my reports, right? Do they become part of that data that I can report on? And the answer is yes. Any of those on-the-fly questions you create, they do become part of your reports later on. If you have polled any demographic assignment questions, you can do all your demographic reports on them as well. Okay, so they work just like a regular polling slide. Okay, perfect. So that brings us into kind of the saving your data and generating reports. So step number one, when you're finished your presentation, is to save your data that you've collected. The reason you want to save it is so that you can go back and run reports later on. Okay, I always recommend save the data because it's a whole heck of a lot easier to go back 2 weeks from now saying, oh, you know what, I never needed to use that. I'm just going to delete it, than to say to yourself 2 weeks from now, oh man, I wish I saved that information because I really want to go back and look at it. So the session files take up very little storage space, so it's not like you need to worry about them chewing up all that valuable storage. Now, step number one to generating reports is to save that information. In order to save it, you want to make sure, and this is very important, you want to make sure you use the Save Disk on your Turning Point toolbar. Okay, like I said before at the beginning, this is all polling functionality here, right? So this is saving the data that you collected. So we're going to go Save Session. Turning Point is going to ask you to give it a name. I'm going to give it a name, and that's going to become the reference point for that file. So later on when we want to run a report, we're going to look for that file in our list of data. Now, before we go over and start looking at our reporting, I want to go back to one of those pre-presentation steps we talked about with resetting your session. And I mentioned the reason you want to do that is to make sure there's no existing data in your presentation. And before we jump out of the presentation and look at reports, I'm going to show you what happens if there is any data in a presentation. So if we had used this presentation before, maybe the week before, month before, or the day before, maybe we were testing it, there might be data sitting in these charts, right? And the problem is, once a question has been polled, you cannot re-poll it without resetting, right? So kind of like hitting that re-poll button, it resets the question. So if you do not reset your presentation and there's existing data sitting in your polling slides, what's going to happen is when you run that with that new group of participants today, polling's not going to open and that old data is going to show up. So whether it's test data, whether it's from a previous group, right, that's what's going to appear. So we just want to make sure that there's no possibility of any of that stuff happening. So once you've opened up your presentation, right, so this is going to be your step number 7, reset your session. Once you've opened it on the Turning Point toolbar, you're going to go Reset Session. And what's going to happen is you'll see Turning Point here. It's just going to go through your presentation, and any polling slides it finds, it's going to clear out any of the data that's sitting there. So you'll see it here in a second. My slides will drop down to zeros. Okay, so that's telling me visually there's no data there. I can run the presentation and everything's going to poll. So that is why resetting your question is very important. A lot of times when I do go from the basic training to the advanced training and people have had a chance to use the technology in between, one of the common questions they'll say is, well, I find polling doesn't always open when I go to run stuff. And then when I kind of go over resetting the session again, everybody says, oh, that's the step I'm missing. So that's step number 7. You can see why it's a very important sort of piece of that pre-presentation session steps, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and close out of my presentation here so that we can have a look at the reporting. Now, to run your reports from your presentations, you do not need to have PowerPoint running. And you do not need to have your presentation open or even on the computer. Okay, all you need is the session file that you saved. And so to run a report, what we're going to do is on the dashboard, we're going to go to Manage. And down the left-hand side here, that's where you're going to see all the different sessions you've created and saved. So all the times you've saved data on your computer. And so it's just a matter of finding the session name that you want to report on. So in my case, it's the March 2015 webinar. I'm going to select it. Turning Point gives me some basic information over here, like how many people were in it, how many questions I polled, what the average participant score was. And I'm just going to click Reports. Okay, and now I get my reporting mode. So what we're looking at here is just a results by question. So it's just all the questions I polled, what the results were. Okay, you'll notice in your reporting, any questions that had correct and incorrect answers assigned, it color codes everything there for you as well, so it's an easy visual reference. Okay, all your reports have these different options here off to the right-hand side. So each report has its own set. And so if you wanted to look at stats, for example, Turning Point can calculate those things for you. If you want to change the report type entirely, okay, this little drop down in the top right is going to let you do that. So if we had loaded a participant list, results by participant lets you see how each individual person responded to all the questions. Results detail is just a very sort of raw data format. So it's your device IDs down the first column, and then question 1, 2, 3 along the top, and then the cell simply shows the answer choice that keypad made to the question. Okay, results by demographic. If we had demographic data, this is where we can start turning all those filters on and off. And then the comparative results report is kind of cool. It lets you compare any two questions. So if you had a series of before questions and then a similar set of after questions and you wanted to see, you know, how did everybody answer pre versus post, the comparative results report will allow you to build that and look at it. Now, regardless of which report you're looking at or working with, you always have the ability to print, okay, directly to a printer paper copy. If you have anything like Adobe Acrobat installed or Acrobat Reader, it's going to give you the option of also saving it to a PDF. And then the export menu allows you to export your data to a CSV format, an Excel format, or HTML. Okay, so if we needed to, you know, maybe make this part of a bigger data set or a report or another presentation, once the data is out there in Excel, I'm sure there's some Excel whizzes on the call right now. You guys all know you can pretty much do anything with that data once it's out into an Excel format, right? So it's very flexible once you get there. Okay, and that's all there is to it as far as your reporting goes. I'm just going to go back here to my trusty presentation. All right, so that brings us to the end of our new user training. Okay, that's kind of a high-level overview on the basics of building some different types of questions, running your presentation, saving and reporting. So it kind of gives you enough information to get out of the gate with using the technology if you haven't had a chance yet. If you have, hopefully that was a good brush up and sort of review. Now, we did finish up here a few minutes early. So what I'll do now, if there are any questions, I noticed you guys were kind of quiet throughout the actual session. But if there are any questions, please feel free, submit them now, either through the QA feature or through the chat feature. And I'll stick around on the line here until 3 o'clock, so for the next 7 minutes or so. And I'll do my best to get through any that come in. And like I said, any that I can't get to in time, if there's a bunch of them that come through, what I'll do is I'll send those responses out as part of the follow-up email tomorrow with the recording and with those PDF resources. Okay, so I'll just have a look here, and yeah, so feel free to fire those questions in if you have any. There's a good question there. So there's a question here regarding autosave with Turning Point. Autosave can be problematic because what can happen is as you're going through your presentation, because Turning Point's making changes to it, autosave will try to save some of that change that happens. And so it doesn't always cause problems. It really depends on the version of PowerPoint you're using and the version of Turning Point you're using. Typically, it was more problematic with the old 2008 version of the Turning Point software. The newer version of Turning Point 5 and the latest Turning Point Cloud, it's not as problematic as it used to be. Some people do still have issues with it, though. The best thing that I can recommend in terms of preventing it from causing an issue with freezing is to disable the autosave feature in PowerPoint. and that's just going to make sure that it doesn't try to autosave when your presentation is running. Okay, so that's really the best way to kind of tackle that or approach it. Other than that, there isn't really a whole lot else that can cause problems with freezing during your presentation. If you're on like an older version of Turning Point 2008, back in that time frame, there was some issues where if you had like an embedded video in your presentation and then you followed that with a polling slide, it would cause your presentation to freeze, or if there were any web links to external websites during your presentation, that would cause it to freeze as well. Those issues have been fixed with Turning Point 5, so as long as Turning Point 5 has been around, it's never been a problem. So if you're on the old version of Turning Point, that could potentially cause some issues, so I would definitely recommend updating if you are on that 2008 version. Other than that, I haven't really seen much in the way of freezing. Obviously, we recommend, if you're running your presentation on your primary work laptop, close down as many of those background tasks as you can. Like shut down email, shut down any background like music players or anything like that that takes up system resources, because the more system resources you can have free for Turning Point, the better it's going to run, right? It's going to generate charts faster, it's going to pull through data quicker, and it's just going to be a better all-around experience. So that's kind of what we recommend in terms of running things. All right, perfect. So we've got a few more minutes left. If there's any other last-minute questions, feel free to fire them in. And one thing I'll just mention while I'm waiting to see if there's any other questions that come through, we do have another webinar tomorrow. However, it's being done by our US team. You may have seen it in our newsletter. It's on our Workspace and Mobi device, so that'll be a pretty interesting one to check out. Thursday at 2 o'clock, we've got another one that I'm doing on self-paced polling with the QT. So if any of you have the QT keypad or even the NXT, they both work the same way for self-paced polling. So if you're interested in running any sort of self-paced exams, tests, large surveys, anything like that, feel free to sign up for that session on Thursday afternoon as well. It's at the same time as this one, so 2 o'clock Eastern. It's the same place to sign up. Just go to turningtechnologies.ca/webinars, and it'll give you access to the sign-up form and everything there. All right, perfect. So that rounds us out to 3 o'clock. It looks like there weren't any other questions that came through. So we'll wrap up now. I'll let everybody get back to their day. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out. If you have any questions following the webinar, because those things always pop into your head afterwards, feel free to email me. Email is just dabram@turningtechnologies.ca. You can also just email training@turningtechnologies.ca as well. And I'll get back to you as quick as I can with the responses that you're looking for. So again, thank you very much for coming out this afternoon, and hope to talk to you all again soon.